I tell you that if we put and package together everything that happens behind the camera, it's a bigger program, I must tell you. All right, let's get into the show proper now. We warn that this report contains flash photography. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari has insisted that the rule of law must be subject to the supremacy of the nation's security and national interest.
Well, he made this comment while declaring open the 54th NBA Annual General Conference. He points out that the law can only be optimally practiced in a Nigeria that is secure and prosperous, and admonishes lawyers ahead of the forthcoming general elections to work for the national unity through their speeches, public positions, and advocacy in court.
All right. We still have joining us Charles Deho, journalist and social commentator, with us in the studio. And joining us now is a lawyer, Olatunbosun Oshifoora. Good morning, Bosun.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Same here.
All right. I'm going to start with you, Bosun. This statement of the president, or the speech delivered by the president in the case where he was quoted, would someone say he was quoted out of context when it comes to the meaning of what he's saying and the interpretation Nigerians are putting to the concept of saying that the rule of law is certainly subject to the supremacy of national interest and all of that?
We know the president, and we know his antecedents, and we know where he comes from. To me, sincerely speaking, maybe because of my professional bias, the forum where that was made, it was quite an unfortunate statement. Coming from a president, coming from somebody who was elected based on the same rule of law, and then before lawyers, before an international audience, it wasn't the best the president could come up with, sincerely. In fact, I spoke with a friend last night and he was like, no, this is a lifeless argument. I said, well, let's just leave that as it is. But sincerely speaking, the angle from which the president was coming from, he was looking at it from a different... I'm trying to play his advocate now, because he felt that if there's no security, law can't thrive. But I think where he failed to, what he failed to understand is that it is law that gives birth to security. Because if there's no law, if there's no rule of law, you take us to what Thomas Hope said, the Obesian state of human.
The state of nature.
You can't imagine what will come out of it. Then secondly, who and what determines national interests or security, national security? Because if we flow on that argument, we'll be delving towards anarchy. And one of the things, I say this almost every time I come around, is that we should be afraid of creating a wrong precedent. Because by the time you go ahead with this kind of statement and you start, okay, we put national security, national interest before rule of law, you may mean well. But my normal slang is you can't be sincerely wrong.
Absolutely. Okay, Charles Deho, exactly. Well, I guess Olatunbosun will be in the better position actually to define for us what exactly we mean when we talk about the rule of law. But, you know, Charles, President Buhari says he will continue to place the national interest and national security above the rule of law. That's subordinating, of course, the rule of law, you know, to national interest and what have you. But then again, if you say that, is that not in itself against the national interest if you make the rule of law subservient to any other thing?
I agree with you. But I think what really has caused this is the lack of proper knowledge of how these things play, or how interplay. You know, we were saying this when we were on break, that if you have a vice president that's a professor of law, and then you were going to give a speech that has to do with law, what you're supposed to have done, as Tubosu said, is to defer to him. You call on to him. Vice, take a look at the speech written for me to deliver. In that August gathering where you have eggheads, where you have legal luminaries. What you do, then let the man go through it, and then he can begin to edit in order to fit the occasion. Because whatever the president says anywhere, whatever he says is gospel. And people will always feast on it. Because he's supposed to be the image maker of the whole country. So his proper understanding of the interplay and all these things is very important. For instance, how can you say the rule of law that is, so not in rule, okay, subservient to
Yeah.
national interest is embedded in the rule of law. So, which comes first? For instance, a nation cannot live peacefully. A nation cannot exist just based on the interest alone. I give an example, for instance. In the 30 years war in France in those days, when France had that 30-year war with Rome, you see, France at that time was a Catholic country, in quote. Okay? But you had this Protestantism coming up to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
What did happen? The man who was there, the Cardinal Richelieu, at that time, even though he knew that Roman Catholicism was also thriving in France, but he decided, he pulled the state of France to support Protestantism, which, because he says that if we begin to allow Protestantism here, it will be to the national interest, to be in the interest of the nation of France. As against
so putting the nation first.
First, that's right. Do you understand? So if look at even the recent one, we saw what happened between Nigeria and South Africa in terms of the finding of MTN. Okay, because of the heavy fine, it was going to hurt the economy. That's national security, the economic security of South Africa.
Yeah.
The South African president flew in here to come and have a rapprochement with our president.
Based on their national interest.
That's it.
Okay.
So you can't say national interest, national security, they are both embedded in the rule of law.
All right. Now, Bosso,
so
let's take you back to the question she was asking earlier. Maybe we need to understand what the Constitution really says. Because we often say that nobody's above the law, not even the president, nobody.
Even the lawmakers themselves.
As the case may be, the country is bigger than any individual. We often make those statements. So, but when it comes to the issue of the rule of law, the way we see it, the way the Constitution puts it, can you simplify it for us to maybe understand, for those of us who are not learned in that context?
The Constitution in itself has defined itself. It says that the Constitution is supreme, the Constitution is sacrosanct, the Constitution is above every other law. If you look at Section 1, subsection 3 of the same Constitution, in fact 2 and 3, it says that any law, any interest made by anybody, anywhere in this land, under this jurisdiction, shall be null and void. Once it's in conflict with the Constitution and the provisions of the Constitution,
that's right,
it shall be null and void to the extent of its inconsistency. So it puts the Constitution above everybody, above every interest, above every other thing that exists within this jurisdiction.
Now, in making that statement, let me just, put this out there. The president talked about the Supreme Court ruling, okay, and we're reminded of the Asari Dokubo Supreme Court judgment in 2007, which states, inter alia, let me sound like a lawyer this morning, where national security and public interest are threatened, the individual rights of those allegedly responsible must take second place in favor of the greater good of society. So now, the point is, while it is an allegation, a person's rights or personal liberties can actually be suspended according to the Supreme Court. When I was having this argument with someone yesterday, the question I asked was, number one, alleged, it is still an allegation.
And not been proven in court.
It has not been proven in court. Now, is it possible that the Supreme Court that comes out with a ruling can actually set aside its own ruling? Is it possible if in practicing that or effecting that ruling, the Supreme Court finds out that there's something not entirely right with this ruling? Is it possible for the Supreme Court to go back to it?
There are instances where one of the cardinal principles of law is what's called stare decisis. That's like you stay with a decision. Like the decision that is made now by particularly the apex court takes precedence over every other decision. But there are instances where the Supreme Court have had time to review its position on some cases, even its stance on some laws, where the Supreme Court now came up with a different interpretation, a different ruling entirely, almost diametrically opposite the previous ones. There are so many instances like that, both in criminal and civil cases. So we've had that, and that happens. There's what is called judicial review and reform. They go back, they sit down, they look at how plausible their arguments or their judgments have been in certain instances. And a lot of times they review it to accommodate the present realities. that the Supreme Court does, and that it can do, and that it will always do. So that is a sane and known position with the Supreme Court. But I need to say something.
Yes.
I don't want to 100% condemn the president. He made the statement against a particular background, which is he feels that, I mean, you know, he's
Based
from the
on,
military. He feels that
yeah.
if people have stolen the country dry, put away fundamental human rights and just deal with this person. I mean, some 2 years ago, about the time he came in, he called the Supreme Court judges, the bigwigs in the legal profession, and he told them point blank that it is the judiciary that is the problem of this nation. He said it, it's on record, it's public record. Now, so he feels that let's expedite things, let's hurry up, let's nip this thing in the bud. These people, they've messed things up, let's just kill them, let's just, not kill in that sense, but let's
outside of the ambit of the law?
Yes,
outside the
but
rule
you see,
of law?
the mistake he's making is, that's why I said he made it against his background as a military person. It will create a wrong precedent. At the end of the day, someone else will come. Following his precedent, who will do something absolutely wrong. All in the name of national interest, national security, and at the end of the day, you will drive the nation into anarchy. By then, and you will have a reference point in this statement by the president. That's why there is no way. I think the president, his handlers will have to come out and say that there is no time and there is no way it will happen in this nation where any form of interest will override the interests of the law.
All right, Charles, we well here in the early 80s where the war against indiscipline and all of that. From that window, we understand who the president is. When it comes to the issues of corruption, no one can dispute the fact that his integrity stands out there. But if we bring it, Buhari in 1983-84 and Buhari now is not the same because of the platform. At that time it was military, now it's democracy and all of that. Now, if we share the sentiments of the president in the context of fighting corruption and let us do everything possible to get rid of this and all of that, would you say that the president understands, up until now, what it takes to run a system in a democracy from the background of the fact that, well, I was in military, when I was young, when I was head of state, you know, we're able to jail this, we're able to jail that, and we saw results. But right now, the system is not allowing me to run the way I'm supposed to run.
For me, I really don't envy the president. Here is a man who wanted to be president for a number of times. He failed. Then Providence brought this in and placed it upon his laps. So he wants to make history. He wants to write his name in gold to say, okay, this was the president who moved off from Egypt, in quote, to the promised land. But there are certain booby traps, there are certain challenges that he's facing, thinking that if I could only just remove these challenges, that I will be the best president ever. That's what I'm saying. I don't envy him. But he seems to be forgetting that the issue of governing or driving the state affair based on martial laws, it's quite different from when you are operating in a democratic environment. Because here, he has to defer to the National Assembly, who are all representing us. Every sphere of this country, every nook and cranny of the country is represented in national. So he cannot on his own say, this is what, yeah, he may have his desire, he may have his own personal drive, but those personal drive are limited by the representation of the whole Nigeria in National Assembly.
Isn't that
which
what
is why I'm
democracy
saying,
offers societies like ours, where autocracy and, you know, democracy actually placed side by side, and you decide which one actually.
No, when people, a lot of people have often said that what we desire in Africa, what we need in Nigeria is a benevolent dictator. But again, that's also calling for anarchy, because when
but can there really be a benevolent dictator?
Oh, well, people have mentioned they have mentioned Lee Kuan Yew and all of them and how they. But in Africa, we have seen over time, even in the olden days and so on before now, that when you gave kings too much power, they seem to overuse it. Which is why I think it's Samuel Rashford, or a Scottish theologian, told them when he brought about this rule of law, that when kings told them to do that, they derived their power divinely.
From Yeah.
So a king could wake up in the morning to say, oh, this is what God told me to do.
Today,
and
exactly.
you couldn't question it. So if we begin to take Buhari back to the divine rules, then there's a problem. If Buhari says, oh, this is what God has asked me to do, we will question him. So which is why
let's bring this back to you. Are the lawyer. Is rule of law just a myth? Yeah, you are. And my question is really, I mean, with all of this, is the rule of law just a myth? Or is it a reality at all? Because it makes you wonder whether rule of law can only apply to the extent that those who bear it are willing to apply it.
The rule of law is not a myth.
Okay.
But it will only be enhanced by the custodians of the law. And even the president cannot come out boldly and say that he's not enjoying this democracy more than he had military rule. As a military ruler, you're under the fear of mutiny can spring up anytime. But that is not going to happen here. If you have differences with him, you will only say your mind or go through the appropriate channels. And that is the beauty of democracy. So he would have to do away with his little bit of, let me not say.
Is he in a hurry to get it right?
Like he said, he wants to put everything right. But you see, at the end of the day, he will get everything wrong. What we need in Africa are strong institutions, not the benevolent
dictator.
It will not work.
They got the Lee Kuan Yew and the others he mentioned. You bring it to Africa. If you copy and paste it in Africa, it's going to give you a different result.
Because the environment matters. The environment matters.
So, but we need to build institutions. I gave an example here once. The president wants the court to act speedily. Yes. Like you've picked a thief who's stolen the country dry. Let's jail him. All right, now, and you feel you should go to court today. The judgment should come out tomorrow. As plausible as that sounds, I'm also in court with my own civil case. I've been there 2 years. You can't just come because of national interest and allow
and set aside.
So why don't you create a judiciary that will act well? That is the way you build institutions. That is the way you put things in place that at the end of the day, the name that you want written in gold will be written more than in gold. Because if you create institutions that work, a good example, the war against indiscipline you talked about, immediately he left. We went back to the same thing.
Exactly.
That was when the culture of Q. I mean, the history, our history is not lost on us.
But it's gone. We didn't buy into it.
Because they bought into the strong mind. They didn't buy into the strong institution.
We're compelled.
But you go to the UK, you go to advanced, countries, and you see that the same thing that works. There was a day I got lost in the UK. I called my dad. The last time he was in the UK was 1984. And he told me, do this. There was a day I got lost in the UK. I called my dad. The last time he was in the UK was 1984. And he told me, do this, do this, do this. And it still worked. That's an institution.
It's a system.
But you can't say that for here.
But then let's even talk about this institution thing we talk about. We often quote Barack Obama in the statement where he came to Africa at the time. But another argument, a scholar said recently that to build institution, you also need strong men to keep that institution. And it takes us back to the Lee Kuan Yews and the Princes of Arabia, as the case may be, and so on. You require men like that, who are maybe benevolent, like you say, or who are visionary, or have the foresight to ensure that an institution is built. For instance, if we even go to recent Rwanda, for instance, the president, Paul Kagame, is a strong man. Put it anyhow. But we are looking at the result of what he is doing. You know, the economy is transforming. He's building social infrastructure. He's building, engineering the social life in Rwanda, putting women in the right place, and all of that. Everybody's commending him. But if you flip the coin, some people are saying he's stepping on toes. Some people are saying he's going against the rule of law. Some people are saying he's jailing people and so on. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, the Paul Kagame example you just gave now, are you aware that Paul Kagame is jailing somebody now for a woman? Daring to
exactly.
Yeah. Because he's been there for too long now. He has become a king, a monarch. All right? So those power that you believe that he has been able to use to build institutions right now, I think Paul Kagame has overstayed his usefulness.
Okay.
What we're not looking for strong men in terms of physical power. Do you remember Professor Dora Kunyili of blessed memory? Did she put any gun to somebody's head before she was able to resist certain laws obeyed in NADAC? Today, when was the last time you ever heard NADAC in the news? This was a woman who came. She knew what she wanted. She insisted on certain principles followed. So it's about insistence, not about being strong in terms of physical strength. So what we need to do...
But it takes a strong person to insist.
No, strength
Exactly.
strength in your mind, in your
because,
will.
Yeah, because that's strength. As
Yes.
far as it's not personal, as far as it's not to your own interest, that is the strength and exactly.
But what you're talking about, what Buhari is driving at is not the strength of the mind, it's strength of let's do it or you get out of it.
Sorry, let me quickly chip in something.
Yes.
Okay.
When Paul Kagame leaves and Rwanda is still the same in another 12, 20 years.
After him.
That's when you
That's
can
when we
make
exactly will say
reference
whether he did
whether
something.
he did well or not. That's when we know whether the institutions have been properly built. When the institutions survive him, then that's when you know that he has done well. But for now, everything is under his whims and caprices. So he drives it the way he wants. But that's what we're trying to sell to the president, that don't just be the strong man who will die today.
And then
God,
we
I mean,
go
God will
we go
extend
back
his life,
to where we're
and
coming
we
from.
go back to, we
And
just gave the
speaking of
example.
strong
Sorry,
men,
let me quickly say this.
yes,
Because
yes.
Do you know that even it's almost possible right now that when Paul Kagame is building institutions because he's strong, according to Mike, question, he is on the one hand building institutions, is he building men that will drive the institution when he's out of power? Which is why he's afraid he's now getting to the third term. Okay? He's afraid that when he leaves, the things might collapse. So what Africans should be doing, rather than promote themselves, we should find a way to strike a balance, a very delicate balance. As we are building institutions, we're also building men that will drive it.
And
in one direction.
Mugabe is a very good example of
Exactly.
a man who started well, you know, Zimbabwe
But lost it along the line.
Yeah.
So
All
that
in the name
shows us that the rule of law.
Okay, let me bring
It's
it back
still-
to, you know, what President Buhari actually said to the NBA. I mean, like you said earlier, it was unfortunate that he made the statement to lawyers.
Exactly.
And
He
he
got me
actually
right
said
about that.
at the conference that, you know, he will promote a transformation and sustainable institutions. Now, can this actually be achieved without the rule of law? Back to the question that we're talking about.
His premise is wrong.
Totally wrong.
His premise is wrong. And I gave an example here some time ago that when I was in like maybe JS2, a friend of mine was doing technical drawing, I think JS or something in the JSS.
Yes.
And he drew something, he left for the sciences. So he drew something very fantastic and he came back with a result. The man gave him 2/30. And we in the art class followed him to the man. The man, very fierce teacher. We just said, excuse me, sir, look at what our friend drew. Something very beautiful. And you gave him to the man, just, you underlined something. He said the foundation is wrong. That
That's
if
it.
you put anything,
on it.
I never forgot.
It was
That's
joke.
some 25 years ago. I never forgot. I still saw my friend. I told him, but I will look at this. That you remember this thing. He said, he's been running with that statement.
Yes, and he can't
Once
draw.
the foundation is wrong, whatever you put on it will collapse. That's the Paul Kagame example.
Exactly.
He need not fear.
But he's afraid.
When Obama was leaving, he knew whoever comes in, as rash as Trump is with his mouth,
This is
all right,
this
this
we
is
make
the
sure we
system
force him.
correct him.
Exactly.
I saw yesterday they were asking him about McCain.
McCain,
And I'm
yeah.
like, when would we get there? We could look at the president. We don't know where our president stays. People go to White House, take pictures in front of his place. I don't even know where Aso Rock is.
You can't
They
even
just
get there.
point
You can't
to a
get
rock.
there.
We don't know where we don't know.
No, in fact, the
can't even
moment you
get
get
there.
to 3-arm zone in Abuja,
I mean,
the
I went to
atmosphere
Cotonou.
changes.
I went to Cotonou. We drove through that Palais do President.
Okay.
Palais du Président.
Okay.
I'm looking
At
at
the
it. Yeah.
Champs-Élysées.
Exactly.
Okay,
If
now,
you go to Kenya, it's the same thing.
It's
The
empty.
presidential,
But here, you can't go near.
Let me remain with you, Olatubosun, because this is a really serious issue with legal implications, far-reaching legal implications. An injustice to one is an injustice to all, like they say. Now, we cannot shy away from mentioning the case of Dasuki, for example. Sambo Dasuki, retired Colonel Sambo Dasuki, former National Security Advisor. We cannot run away from the issue of the El Zakzaky and all the other issues. We can infer that what the president had in mind was, look, we need to deal with these issues before they get out of hand, or people who have offended in terms of putting their hands into the national, you know, the public till and what have you. Now, in the case of this, both two gentlemen, would you say that Dasuki, for example, is a security threat to the nation?
To the extent where he has to be denied.
To the extent where this, you know,
the rule of law is set aside.
Yeah.
I beg to differ on this issue of Dasuki, but let's just leave the history.
In spite of the fact that there have been 6 court rulings to grant him bail.
I beg to differ with the president on this Dasuki thing because we're aware of the history between the two of them. But let's leave that. What the president has failed to realize is that when he leaves, there will be another Dasuki. There will be another El Zaki Zaki. How do we deal with them? Is this the way forward? Absolutely not. So the best thing we can do is that let the institutions act. There are people they're tougher people than these people in other crimes, and they have ways of dealing with it through their institutions. That's why we will still come back to these same institutions, strengthen the institution. There are NSAs that are more powerful than these people. Fine, an NSA is not somebody you just release to the public like that. But there are ways you can, once the court says this, then there are ways and measures you can actually put him, I mean, you can appeal to the court, put him under house arrest, do this, do that, take necessary measures. Because the information with him, really, if you allow it in the public space, you may cause problems. It will threaten the national security. But there are ways you can still deal with it. You don't deal with, if you have 10 of him, is that how you will go about it? You will create more problems than you're trying to solve. So that takes us back to the fact that the rule of law must always prevail. If he allows the court to be, that is a law. As beautiful as this government has performed, the El Zaki Zaki and the Dasuki thing, they're a low point for this government. And it may come back to haunt them, particularly for a re-election.
Yeah, Charles, we're looking at time now before we go. We all know that the president doesn't sit down and write the whole of his speech, for instance. He could give ideas, tips here and there, or maybe a speech is written and then he has to take this out and all of that. But we want to assume that the president didn't write the whole of that speech by himself, but maybe he would have taken time to go through it somehow. And he would have say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that as to the aides helping, like you were saying, the aides putting things together? So, when it comes to the aides doing justice to this, because sometimes the president can be overwhelmed by the work around him, his aides are supposed to foresight and see implication of what the president has not even said on the public. Do you think they're doing a nice job?
They're not, because that's why the Constitution allows the president or the governor to hire special assistant on this, special assistant. What are you supposed to do? Yeah, because, for instance, as a journalist, you know my strength. When you're going to discuss certain issues, I'm not sure you're going to discuss building technology. You're going to bring me in because I'm not omniscient. I'm not omniscient at all. When you're going to have to discuss about road construction, I mean, the other day you brought in those people from
engineers.
Exactly, because they did justice to the question that they fielded. What I'm saying first is that when you have all this, when the president is going to deliver a speech, for instance, you will have to. He has people who are advising him. I expected the input of the national security. I expected the input on the advisor on the issue of legal. When he's going to talk about economy, I expected the input of people who are the economic advisors. So that when he read this speech, people are, oh, the president's speech is fantastic. But he wasn't the one who wrote it. But there are people who are putting certain things. I mean, I have written speeches for people when I watch them on TV. I mean, nobody calls Charles Ideho that wrote the speech. But we worked on it. So, and then again, you find that when you find some of these highly placed people reading speeches at times, they are glued to it. That's why I always correct. When you are reading speech to people, you are supposed to have eye interaction with your viewer. But they always stay there because they don't want to miss a line.
Ideho, it is 59 already. Last word from you, Olatubosu. Man was not made for the law, but the law was made for man. Where does that stand in this, very briefly before we...
That is what the president should understand. That is the appeal to the president. He needs to completely take away his military garment and understand that this is a democracy and this is how democracy works. And he needs to take responsibility for his action. Whoever wrote the speech, we don't know him, like he said. He's made good speeches and we never had recourse to those who wrote it. So he needs to stand by his words. He needs to come back, recant this, and tell us.
And then we applaud you.
Verify.
And
Okay,
we
we have to leave you here now. Olatunbo Soshifowora, thank you so much for coming on the
My
program.
pleasure.
And Chelsea Deho, thank you very
It's my
much.
pleasure. Thank you.
Right.